Please have a seat in the witness chair. Mr. Anderson.
Can you please state your first and last name and spell your last name for the record?
Scott Knudson, Knudson.
And how are you employed?
Sheriff for St. Croix County.
How long have you been in law enforcement?
In my 29th year,
How long have you been sheriff?
since 2017.
And as sheriff, do you have, what can you just briefly outline what your duties are?
A number of administrative duties as well as overseeing the jail, tending to the courts.
Do you typically get involved yourself in patrols or investigations, or are you more administrative?
Not often, more administrative and ensuring cases are assigned out.
Do you work Monday through Friday, business hours essentially?
Yes,
Do you get called in often too?
I do.
Did you get called in to the Apple River stabbing?
I did.
And where did you respond?
For my residence right in the Somerset area.
And did you go to the scene of the stabbing or somewhere else?
I originally went to the bridge, the Sunrise Bridge, which was very close to the scene of the stabbing, the closest access point.
At some point, did you end up going to the park where the exit is?
Yes.
And what was the overall response, law enforcement response for this case?
There's a large response from not only internally with Sheriff's Office and coordination with getting people called in, but also surrounding communities. It was outside of the village limits, the original incident, so Somerset was involved. Richmond was coming over. I believe I was on the phone with Washington County, just trying to get staff and resources to come our way.
And were helicopters called for also?
Yes, I believe there's a helicopter en route as well.
And was that specifically a law enforcement helicopter?
Yes, I believe it was a Minnesota State Patrol that we were trying to gather.
And what's the point of the State Patrol helicopter?
At that point, we weren't aware of where the suspect was and that he was not in that area. So because of the wooded nature of the river and the long banks, that a bird's eye view was going to help us tremendously.
And was the sheriff's office trying to set up a perimeter?
Yes, there was a perimeter that had been set up from the hideaway on 170th towards County Road I.
And at some point, did you hear that the officers believed they had a suspect in custody?
That is correct, yes.
And did you respond to the area?
I did.
And did you end up making brief contact with Nikolai Mew?
I did, yes.
And were you wearing body camera?
I had my body camera with me, yes.
Judge, I'd move to admit and publish the body camera.
What's the exhibit number?
7.
The objection to number 7?
No.
7 is received. Please play the portion that you wish to play.
It's the whole video, Judge. Let me try it out. Oh. Thank you.
Camera recording started.
Still doing all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's going
Temperature's okay in here?
on? Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody,
All
I hear somebody got stabbed, and I fit the description.
Yes, you do.
All right.
Yep. So we're working through that now.
Judge, it's 23 seconds. I'm going to ask if I can play it again. I was a little quiet at first.
The volume was turned down. I'll let you go one more time since the audio is perhaps relevant.
Camera recording started.
Still doing all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What's going
Temperature's okay in here?
on? Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody,
All right.
I hear somebody got stabbed,
Um,
and I fit the description.
yes, you do.
All right.
Yep. So we're working through that now.
I just have one more question. So if earlier the jury saw a body camera of Nikolai being told he's under arrest for homicide, was that actually after this contact? Where he's transferred from one squad to another in a parking lot?
No, not transferred from one squad to the other. That was after this contact.
Gotcha. Okay. So this happened, then transferred squads in a parking lot, told he's under arrest, happened after your contact.
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify it because we went a little out of order with the testimony. Nothing else.
Mr. Nelson?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You're familiar with the Apple River?
I am.
I think we've seen some maps and talked about Village Park. You're familiar with Village Park?
Yes,
That is essentially the designated exit spot for tubers, correct?
that is correct.
Mr. Mew left the river at the designated exit spot for tubers, correct?
I would believe so, yes, from where he was standing.
You didn't personally observe it, but you saw him there at Village Park, correct?
Correct.
You didn't see him get out of the tube and walk up, but that's where you first saw him, correct?
That's where I first made contact, yes.
And obviously, you're not aware of any other evidence that he exited somewhere before that, correct?
No, I'm not.
All right. As the sheriff, I would imagine you are aware of cases in your county, correct?
Most of them, yes.
Yep. And some cases maybe draw your attention more than other cases, correct?
That's correct.
Certainly, this is a case that you were aware about from the get-go and you've paid attention to, correct?
Correct.
Because that's your job, right?
Yes,
It's your responsibility, correct?
correct.
Obviously, there's investigators and other law enforcement officers that are assigned specific tasks, right?
Yes,
But you, as the sheriff, ultimately, you supervise all of that, right?
yes,
So I would imagine you are occasionally updated about the investigation, correct?
correct.
Updated about evidence gathering, correct?
Yes,
There might even be times when you meet with the investigators to talk about what the status is about some piece of evidence or what other evidence you might want to collect or other things of an investigative nature, correct?
yes,
Because as law enforcement, there's lots of things you want to do. I understand there's safety and there's all of that, right? Correct?
yes,
I'm just going to put that aside for a second, okay? Talk about the investigative role of law enforcement. Are you with me?
yep,
And in that role, it's essentially your role and responsibility is to collect any and all evidence that you can, that you have reason to believe might be relevant, correct?
correct.
And that's something that there's policies on in your department, correct?
Evidence collection, yes,
Yeah. And I'm sure you played a part in those policies. They've changed over the years that you've been the sheriff, right?
yes.
And
I'm not checked on relevance and foundation for this witness.
I'm unclear what the relevance is. Where are you going?
well, let me.
Actually, why don't you come on up? You can tell me. Objection overruled. You may continue.
And I don't want to get into the particulars about policies, but in general, there's policies, you play a role in forming those policies about making how investigations go and how evidence is collected, correct?
Correct, and best practices, yes.
Yeah. And probably even before you were a sheriff, but certainly since you've been sheriff, the value of evidence from phones has increased, correct?
Yes,
You're certainly aware that lots of information can be gathered from somebody's phone, correct?
correct.
And you, as a standard in your office, I'm sure it's, your officers, deputies, investigators, they collect phones, correct?
When applicable, yes.
And when applicable, they then do a forensic download of that phone, correct?
Yes,
To gather anything and everything that they can from that phone, correct?
yes.
In this case, you were, again, I don't want to get into the details of what somebody told you, just your general awareness about a particular part of the investigation, okay? You were aware that there was going to be a factual issue in this trial about whether Madison Cohen was or wasn't punched. What happened to Madison Cohen, correct?
If that's the lady that was punched.
Well, that's a factual issue that the jury's going to decide, but you understood that there,
I don't know the name. I'm
That's all you
not-
meant.
That's what I meant. My
but that
fault.
there was a witness, let's put her name aside. There is a witness that was there, and you're aware that there was a factual issue about whether that witness did or did not get punched or slapped or pushed, or how there was some contact with her. Agreed?
Yes,
And you're aware that as part of that investigation, there was your department was trying to see if there was or there wasn't a photo of her face that might document an injury, correct?
that sounds familiar, yes.
There's been testimony that I want to give you a chance to see if you have a rebut to that, right? There's been testimony that perhaps a phone was offered up to the sheriff's department with a piece of evidence, and the sheriff's
Overruled.
department said, no, we don't want that phone, we don't care about that picture.
Yes.
Let me start over. There is a witness whose name is Quentin Carlson, and he testified that it was his understanding that there was a photo taken of this witness, Madison Cohen, and that the phone that took that photo was offered up to your sheriff's department, and your department said, nah, we don't want the phone, we don't need the photo, we don't want anything to do with that. Are you aware that any such phone was offered to the sheriff's department?
I'm not aware of that, no.
I would imagine, had a phone been offered up to the sheriff's department, the best practice, the policy would have been for them to collect the phone, correct?
Best practice would be, if applicable, yes.
Certainly if somebody in a homicide case said, I've got a photo of the injury to one of the victims, that would be applicable, right?
Yes,
And so in that scenario, the best practice, the policies that you've helped write and establish within the county would be for your sheriff's investigators, members to collect that phone, correct?
yes.
And as far as you know, they did collect a phone, right? Or you may not know,
I don't know.
okay. You would, if they did not, that would surprise you, right?
May or may not, depending upon everything surrounding it. There was a lot of evidence that was collected. I don't know where this one you're referencing fell in,
Okay.
or at what time.
Maybe I should just ask you this. Based upon your position as the sheriff, do you have any reason to believe that it's true that a piece of evidence in a homicide case was offered up to the sheriff's department regarding alleged victim Madison Cohen, and that your department just dismissed it and said, we don't want it? Do you have any reason to believe that that's true?
I have no reason to believe or not believe it. That's all news to me. I don't know.
Okay, all right. I'm going to move on to a different topic now, okay? I would imagine in your 29 years, you've had lots of different roles within the sheriff's department or as a law enforcement officer, right?
Yes,
Probably like lots of people, in the sheriff's department, you started out on the road, you've eventually moved up in ranks, and now you're the sheriff, correct?
correct.
As part of that training, you have training and experience to detect alcohol, right?
Correct.
The use of alcohol by people, correct?
Yes,
And you certainly know that sometimes, whether somebody has or has not consumed alcohol, that's going to be important and relevant to an investigation of a crime, correct?
it very well could, yes.
And so when you're in those situations, even if you're not looking for it, if you happen upon evidence of alcohol consumption, you would note that, correct?
Yes,
You were arresting a suspect and you were in their personal space, close enough to them to smell alcohol, you'd have made a note of that, correct?
correct.
Or if you heard slurred speech or something along those lines, you'd have made a note of it, correct?
Yes,
Any sign of intoxication, you'd make a note of it and you could figure out the relevance of it later, correct?
yes,
Sometimes, if you made observation of it, you might decide to do further investigation, give a test of some sort, whether it be a chemical test or a field test, correct?
I'm just objective, these are cumulative.
It's not cumulative with this witness.
What's that?
It's not cumulative with this witness.
It's not, but we've heard this before. Let's just cut to the chase.
You agree?
can you read your question again?
And there's some times where if you did note something that you smelled or you heard or some other observation, you might continue and do further tests, either a field test or a chemical test, right?
Based on the crime, yes.
In this case, you had contact with Nikolai Mew, correct?
Yes,
We saw the video where he was sitting in a closed, in a back of a squad car, correct?
yes,
Closed space, right?
yes,
Hot day, right?
yes,
And you were there to check on the temperature for him, right?
correct.
And when you opened the door, you had a brief conversation with him, correct?
Yes,
And then later, at a parking lot, sometime later, you also were there when he got out of one car and got into another car, correct?
yes,
And you had contact with him there, correct?
yes,
Throughout all of those contacts, is it fair to say that you didn't see any signs of intoxication?
I did not detect any, no.
That's all.
Mr. Anderson?
Nothing else.
All right, thank you, Sheriff. You may step down.
Thank you.